Thank you all for being here today. And thank you three for coming and speaking with us today. And yeah, we're looking forward to taking some time to talk about a market and a country that I know excites all three of you a lot. And a lot of the sessions over the last day and a half have touched on some of the reasons investors and startups are so exhilarated in this market. And I think this panel would be a great chance to sort of drill down into some of those things and get into a bit deeper why we're all so excited about Indonesia. And yeah, hence the title of our talk, The Next Big Thing in Indonesia. We're going to break the talk sort of into two parts today. I think the first thing to do before we talk about the next big thing is we'll look at two big verticals already, e-commerce and fintech, and talk a bit about what space we see in them for new players, because they may seem dominated by incumbents a bit, but we want to get your insights into what room there is for new startups. So, diving into e-commerce, I guess the first thing that's certainly on my mind when I read about and write about e-commerce in Indonesia at the minute is TikTok Shop a little bit. And so, obviously its growth and the rate of its growth was incredibly unique. But it does show there's latent demand out there for consumers to shop and consume live streaming content at the same time. So I guess my question would be, could you see a new startup capitalizing on this demand? Or do you think the incumbents are going to continue to dominate that space? Maybe I'll start with you, Michael.
I think e-commerce is maybe one of the two sectors in Indonesia that has been most penetrated digitally. So digital penetration of e-commerce is already in the double digit, in the low teens, and we still see that continuing to grow. If you talk about horizontal e-commerce, I think it's going to be very difficult for a new entrant to try and compete with the incumbents that we have today. Because to build a platform, you need to attract seller and buyer, and to do that, it's a very capital intensive. And when there's already a few very strong players in the market, that's going to be challenging. TikTok, I think, is an exception, but there has been certain revision in regulation which is changing the way they can continue to operate as well. It's done to protect mainly local SMEs so that there is less purchases going from overseas directly dropship to customers in Indonesia. So that's why there was a regulation that was enacted recently. If you talk about opportunities within e-commerce, there's still possibilities in more vertical e-commerce specialized. So it's going to be websites or platforms that are building community and it's designed around a specific topic or a specific product category. We have seen some of those that are still able to thrive and grow, even though there are still big horizontal e-commerce that are offering similar products. So for example, in skincare, you can see Sociola that has been growing in the past couple of years, despite there are also skincare and beauty products being offered in Shopee or Tokopedia or Bukalapak. Yeah, so I think the opportunities will have to be a little bit more specific and targeted.
Thank you, Michael. Kenneth, do you have anything to add to that? Specific opportunities within e-commerce, like Michael touched upon.
Yeah, I think the e-commerce industry, I think it's definitely still very large. Indonesia itself, I think in terms of consumer market is definitely one of the largest in Southeast Asia. And to be honest, it's we've seen several cases, and even one of the companies, Evermost, they've been trying to approach, I would say, social commerce, not really truly e-commerce, and they've been relatively quite successful in their segment. So. And then you're also talking about, not only the tier 1 city or the tier 2 city, you can basically tap into the tier 3 or tier 4 city. And how do you go into that, these smaller cities, and I think what TikTok bring is that they bring, social aspect of things and then try to tap into this, smaller cities and basically enable all the smaller cities to purchase from well, the rest is also doing the same thing, but from a different approach. They're only approaching it from a commerce side. But on the other hand, what TikTok brings is the social aspect of it, and it's enticing for a lot of people, especially in the, in the tier 3, tier 4 city. So I think a lot of other companies can still have this opportunity, and it also shows that, with TikTok actually, it shows that there is possibility if you want to come into this space, but you need tremendous investment. And I think that is what TikTok has, that compared to, like, let's say, some of the other startups that have been trying to do the same thing in Indonesia. But on the other hand, we have to see, if there is so much, let's say, competition and predatory pricing and, basically discounts wars, how long will it last, right? So at the end of the day, if there's a segment or a market that is already dominated by a player, I think it's also not healthy for, the industry overall to see this kind of, competition. But at the end, like Michael said, there's always the vertical part, the supporting, industry like logistics or fintech that can support, this industry, and you can actually tap into that segment instead of focusing only on the e-commerce part. And another part that I see is actually, the government has been pushing for local SMEs, and manufacturing in Indonesia is still relatively, I would say, low compared to like China or the rest of the other Southeast Asia country. So, that's something that you can probably tap into if you want to basically, do a D2C brand or, direct manufacturing or cloud manufacturing. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Karen. What about you, Yiping? I know Kenneth usually mentioned logistics. I know that's something I believe you recently spoke about green logistics at another panel. Do you have any insights on that? Sure.
Yeah, before I go to green logistics, maybe let me just cover a little bit more what's the impact on, of TikTok, right?
Yeah, sure.
We believe we have a study that actually shows that with the arrival of TikTok, a lot of these informal social commerce channels the traffic is gonna flow to more TikTok-like kind of formalized models where it's not like someone ping you on Facebook or Instagram, right? The impact now is that a lot of this traffic will flow back to the informal channels, which is probably good news for the individual mom and pop who are starting out and don't want to have any commissions to be shared and still wants to figure out this kind of logistics by themselves. So there is some good news there in that sense. But also then for the consumer, the lack of a formalized way of organized e-commerce would mean that the only way you go back is to then also go back to the e-commerce companies, right? Your Shopee, Lazada, Tokopedia, etc. Yeah, so we see that traffic is going to flow. Whether there could be another kind of upstart who can really take place in this, I think it's quite unique what TikTok has done, which is what you mentioned. TV shopping is not new, right? It leverages the whole TV shopping, and the premise of TV shopping is that there is prime time, there's traffic, right? There's viewership, and this viewership are latent demand. So, not sure who can really kind of replace that, but we think that it's really a combination of the traffic flows. And now to the green logistics. Green logistics is still a very nascent topic here in Southeast Asia. In the Western counterparts, we are seeing, because the regulation is a lot more, let's say, incentivizing, and thus green logistics is beginning to really take shape. But still, there are a lot more upstarts rather than mature companies. If we take that perspective and layer over in Southeast Asia, you will see that existing logistic companies are the ones who are trying to see if they can adopt some sustainable material in the process at a potential price parity range. I think right now the biggest issue is that the customer demand signal is not that strong. There is interest, but it's not so strong to the point that it's signaling to logistic companies to adopt this green-related products at scale. So of course, green logistics is quite wide. It can be anywhere from material in the packaging to optimization routing, right? I think in routing, it will highly benefit a country like Indonesia where the end-to-end goes through many hands, and definitely efficient routing can really help that. Not just in the greening, but also in the cost optimization. Yeah, so if we look at from that perspective, green logistics still have a lot of ways to go. Definitely not anywhere near maturity. Yeah, so we have to see how some of the government incentives can help give a boost in this area.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess then moving on to something like an area that is a bit more mature here, and we'll touch on fintech a little bit. So Indonesia obviously went through its big fintech boom through lending and other verticals like that. But I guess it's, as I said, it's maturing a bit. What, are you guys excited about anything within wealth tech or insurtech? Or do you have anything to talk about there in terms of Indonesia? Michael?
Fintech is a very broad sector. So there is anything from lending, there is also transfers, money mobility, there is investment platforms or wealth tech, there is insurance. The idea is Indonesia is very underpenetrated in terms of providing access to the people and in financial products. So credit card insurance is low single-digit penetration today compared to other countries. Basic loan is maybe 1 in 4 adults, and also even bank accounts. Not that many people have a bank account in Indonesia. So the idea is offering and democratizing access to these products, and is what these fintech companies are trying to build. So we invested in insurtech. We invested in a company called Fuse, which sells insurance through a referral system online. And we also invested in a wealth tech company called Stockbit. That's interesting because online trading is something that is quite conventional. There are other players that are offering the same service, but they also have an asset management application called Bibit, which you can now invest using wallets. And this actually opened up access, because previously products like mutual funds, bonds, there is to be able to access those products, you need a minimum account balance, which is quite high. For a product like some foreign mutual funds like Schroeder, for example, you need maybe a few $1,000s in minimum balance to be able to open an account. But through applications like Bibit, you will be able to do so with a few ₹100,000. So, and you don't need a bank account, you can connect to your wallet. So this has opened up the access. They have already now, I think the number of investor account has increased significantly in the past few years. There's a lot of first-time investors, young investors that are investing for the first time. AUM per user keeps growing, and these are the kind of products that truly delivers value to our people, because people now can learn to save and have access to otherwise previously inaccessible products because they don't have the bank accounts or they cannot meet the minimum balance to save. So, yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I guess at this stage, maybe we should move on to the new things that you guys are excited about. And in our preamble, we heard a bit about D2C and other things like that. But as we talked about before, let's jump into anything you guys think is exciting. And I guess I might start with electric vehicles. I think, Yiping, that's something you are pretty bullish on.
Yep. So there, you know, we at McKinsey, we have done a lot of electric vehicle builds with our clients in terms of understanding the whole landscape, penetration, etc. So just a small statistic here in Indonesia, by 2040, about half of the vehicles are going to be electric. I mean, when I first look at this number, I'm like, whoa, really? Wow, that's a huge ramp up. And what is needed, right, for infrastructure to get there? So if the government is really like very committed towards this path, and we're really heading towards a 2040, but let's say 2050, okay? Let's just give it some discount. But even then, right, a lot of the electrification ecosystem would have to happen, which means that whatever you're seeing on the road now is going to change. Yeah. So lots of electric vehicles for sure, and it's largely driven by two-wheelers in Indonesia. And if we look at what is happening in India right now, where if you surveyed Indian consumers just 5 years ago, whether they would purchase an EV vehicle online, the answer is like, okay, 20%, perhaps I would buy off online, right? And now the Indian consumer is switching to 60% of them saying that, yes, I would buy online. And maybe they have gone to the showroom once or twice. Or they have already seen a friend or a family member have that model. So if we kind of like bring that trajectory that we're seeing in India to Indonesia, where two-wheelers are such a big deal here. Of course, today is ICE, your regular bike. There's a lot of change that I think needs to be done. One is, of course, who are your local brands, right? Besides importing brands, who are some of your local superstar players that you can invest in? And I know our friends here have some EV investments too. So that's the first question, right? And then the second question who is investing in the charging infrastructure, right? Home infrastructure, given the consumer will do it, but who's involved in the public, right? Charging or lifestyle charging, whatever that is. So the charging infrastructure also have to reach certain, let's say, nascency, then booming. And then what is the associated, for us is also we found there's a lot of associated ecosystem impact. For example, Indonesia, no secret, everyone knows that it's one of the world's largest nickel, right, producers. And we also saw that Indonesia has a big role to play when it comes to, packaging, semi-packaging, semi-finish some of these nickel products, ship off or even locally to some of the folks who can really turn them into proper, let's say, end battery, right? End battery products. Yeah, so there's just a lot going on in the electrification space. What I'm trying to solve for on a daily basis is how do we get from all the few thousand here and there pre-orders to a 2040 vision where 50% is really electrified. So many things have to be done in that value chain. And that's why there's a lot of investment that will go into electrification. Yeah.
Let me open that one up to Kenneth. And first of all, would you drive an electric vehicle, or do you?
Yeah, I do.
There's a start. And second of all, like Yiping talked about the value chain, I guess what part of that are you most excited about, or what do you think could have the most potential?
On the value chain for EV?
Yeah,
Again, it's a new technology, and I think this is something that the world is going to. And if you see how the world, most countries are building their regulations around it, I think it's very important as well. Because, one part that actually helps drive innovation and technology is how, governments are shaping the regulations to help and support the technology being mature. So, if you see a lot of the Indonesian regulations that is coming out, it's actually going towards that direction. So obviously a lot of the investment should go into the same directions, because that's where, most government and even Indonesian government are trying to go to. And, in Indonesia at least, if you're talking about, let's say, the battery technology, we're not one of the most advanced in our R&D for battery technology, but the government is trying to push for at least locally manufactured battery, trying to, entice all the automakers to start building their manufacturing here. And hopefully in the near future, all this technology can be transferred. And I think we see this in, several other countries who are, let's say, lagging behind other countries. They try to, invite more, mature technologies from other countries, and they try to learn from that countries. And at the end, they can get into the same level. I mean, if you see China, they've been improving a lot in the past 20, 30 years. And part of it is because they not only become the manufacturing hub, but they now start to become the R&D hub for a lot of this, major or global players. So I think in Indonesia, in the EV sector, we can be one of them. But I think a lot of the investment should really support this as well, because without the right investment, this is just a dream.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we'll change tacks a little bit into something I know Michael is excited about, and that's the consumer side of things, I guess. Do you want to just dive into that for us?
Can I add something about EV
Yeah, no,
as well?
absolutely, sorry.
This is also a space that we are very optimistic about, and we, like what Yiping was saying, the world is heading towards that direction. I think if you look at other markets where they have a lot of two-wheelers in China, in Vietnam, the penetration of two-wheelers reached double digit within less than 5 years. And I think that was a couple of years ago. So in Indonesia, it may even be faster. Why? Because the products are very high quality, comparable prices, and operational costs is actually significantly lower. Depending on how heavy you use your motorbikes, you can get up to 80% cost savings. So if you buy, for example, today the ICE market for two-wheeler is dominated by Honda. One of their very popular variant is called Honda Vario. If you use an EV of a similar price range, within 5 years, you actually get a Vario for free. So that's how much more efficient it is. So over time, people, as long as the charging infrastructure is available, and many of these products offer home charging, and the electricity requirement is also in line with what most people already have in their homes. So you can charge at home, and you can use your bike at 80% less operational costs. So over time, it's definitely going towards that direction. And when we have enough population on the road, there will be more charging infrastructure players out there as well, because when you have enough population, it can be a profitable business as well. So definitely EV for two-wheeler is something that is going to start happening in the next couple of years.
Does anyone else want to jump in on EVs, or shall we?
Consumer? Maybe let me give some interesting stats. I was an operator myself, entrepreneur, and then an investor. And I never had the luxury of McKinsey's data points. Now that I have it, I'm pretty excited with some of the numbers that I see, and then that can segue to consumer. So interestingly, just a few years ago, there's 80 million middle class income in people in Southeast Asia, 80 million. By the time 2030, 2035 comes, that is going to double. So we're going to have 160-something million in the middle class segment, right? So this is quite interesting because 2030, as a stat, is coming soon, right? Of course, maybe let's moderate that with some of the, recessionary kind of vibes that we are getting from the economy right now. Let's just delay that by maybe 5 more years, right? But that's coming. So what that means is that now people move from pure subsistence, making enough for the family to pay for essentials, right, survival, to really finally saving, and in that saving also to finally also within the essential you can choose a bit better. I think that's the translation of it, right? And then when we talk about fintech, wealth tech, etc., finally you also have more people who move away from just saving to also thinking about investment. So I think we are probably going to get closer, right? Definitely in the next 10 years, closer to that cups of seeing that doubling. And Indonesia is going to be a big beneficiary from this doubling, right? Because of pure population size. So I think that's a good segue to our good friends here who are, very excited about consumer. I also came from the consumer space, but let me give time to, the D2C consumer thesis that you're seeing, and then I would also like to jump in, in the in terms of DCs?
Yeah. So we have invested in a number of consumer D2C categories, skincare, apparel, a few others as well. I think it's definitely, as Yiping mentioned, the macro trajectory. We have a very young population, rising middle class. All that is very conducive for consumer companies to keep growing. Some product categories are less competitive than others, and they enjoy very significant gross margins, 70, 80% even. And they don't have to only be specifically D2C. Think of online as one sales outlet, and you can also still you can be omni-channel and you also have offline sales. Whichever sales that actually can support your growth continuously, and you're a consumer company basically. You don't have to only be online, or you don't have to be only offline. And we are seeing many of these companies growing more than 20-30% CAGR at a sustainable pace. They're profitable. There's going to be a wave of these companies that we can invest on in the next couple of years, and it's going to be a very good opportunity.
And Kenneth, do you want to jump in there? As Yiping said, I know you're excited about this space as well.
For consumers, I mean, for us, we don't do a lot of consumer investing, but it's actually definitely, I think, a big market that we are now paying attention to. Obviously, for us, what matters is actually, what Yiping mentioned, the rise of the middle class, right? I think when you're trying to build a consumer company or consumer startup, you need to pay attention to, let's say, the excess income that can be, then transferred into consumer spending. So definitely for us, I think that is one factor that we always pay attention to, and I think we see now that is definitely rising. But for us, we are still, basically trying to figure out what type of, D2C brands we want to tap into, what type of company. And at the end of the day, there's so many, factors that we see, whether it's for, just for primary, or let's say just, let's say events, or any type of spendings that relates to consumer. We really need to kind of like pay attention if the product itself is really, bringing benefits to the spenders. I think that's something that we are now trying to kind of like figure out for MDI, and we are learning because a lot of our portfolios is mostly in B2B. That's why for us another segment that we are very bullish is actually also in B2B, because from day one we can know whether this company will make money or not, whether the service will be used by a lot of companies or not. So that's one thing that we pay attention to.
Okay, so I guess we've got about a minute or so before we jump into questions. I guess I'll give this time to you guys. If anyone wants to speak about another space they're bullish on, jump into it now before we...
Yeah. So, hey, last point on consumer. I think with the rise of the middle class, it may not be easy to see initially, because this consumer dollar would have to be spread among essentials, right? And then maybe even consuming a little bit more better education or healthcare, etc. So I think this additional dollars is going to be spread among various baskets. So thus, it is going to benefit not just, let's say, D2C brands or retail brands, right? It is going to be like across the board. Yeah, so I think that's my last point. The other thing that I'm really pretty bullish on, but it's going to take, let's say, figuring out when this middle class really can start spending more, is actually in healthcare. We all know that Indonesia has a lot of gaps still to be worked on, and right, for example, there's only one hospital bed per 1,000 in Indonesia, and I think GP-wise is like 0 point something per 1,000. Yeah, so I don't have that specific stat, but we know that there's so much work to be done. And because it's an essential need, the moment you do have a little bit more disposable income, that's one of those things that you either want to treat yourself better or for your family. Yeah, so I think insurance, health, these are going to also increase over time. It's not going to be like a sudden jump, but over time, you'll be chipping away. The startup is trying to figure out, why am I not getting the additional dollars yet? But then it will get to some level of hockey stick. Yeah.
I guess before we jump into questions then, do Michael or Kenneth, you want to jump in on health?
Yeah, there's another sector I think I want to, talk about. I think it's in the agri-tech sector. I think it's a sector that I think often overlooked. Indonesia, I think, is a prime location for the agri-tech industry. And I think in the past 2 years, we've spent enough time to kind of invest in this sector. It's a sector that I would say doesn't really need so much tech and innovation, because the tech and innovation is already available. The business model itself, it's not really different. It's basically buy low, sell high. If you can basically grow your crops at a very cheap price, then you can sell at a very premium price. That's the whole point of it. But it's definitely still very interesting that the yield of production in Indonesian agri-tech is still far below the world standard. Sometimes even as low as 1/4 of the global standard. And things like this, to be honest, is definitely an opportunity for a lot of the tech startup to come into, because funnily enough, if you go to some of the rural area, talking to farmers, they sometimes doesn't even know why they cannot have a very high yield on their farms. Some funny story is that one of our portfolio, they did a survey, and then when they talk to the farmers, they say, the wife actually tell, oh yeah, the farm didn't give enough yield because you didn't go and pray enough, salat enough, or something like that. But at the end, once our scientists came into the land, we found out that the land is actually not, the pH level is not enough. They didn't even use the right seeds. So things like this are very scientific, and it's applicable to the whole of Indonesia. But the thing is, a lot of company doesn't really think agri-tech as an industry that they need to pay attention to, but it's actually one of the sector that I really think need very much attention, especially regarding food security. You're talking about alternative protein and everything, but at the end in Indonesia, if we can just increase the yield to the global standard just in this country, I think we can expect so much more. And for Indonesia at least, it's a big portion of our GDP. So I think it's really a sector that really needs more attention. But at the end of the day, it's not a sexy industry like fintech or e-commerce, right? But I would say it's a sector that I would pay attention in the next coming few years.
So if I may jump in quickly, I like what Kenneth is pushing here. We are beginning to see that it's more and more important to pay attention to omnichannel. So especially in this part of the world where tech sometimes cannot be the only solution. It is also an enabling solution, and it needs to also get you closer to your clients offline. So we're seeing that this omnichannelification is becoming important, where if you're a tech startup, think online of course, but also think offline, right? How do you partner with the folks offline? How do you acquire these offline folks, and how do you slowly bring them on board using digital tools? So we're seeing that you cannot ignore the offline, unfortunately, especially in Indonesia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can we all give it up for them?
Thank you.